Welcome back from the break, and I hope you feel fully refreshed. So we are now going to have a panel which is moderated by the chair of GAAMAC, which is going to be on genocide as a precursor, hate speech as a precursor to genocide. Just a reminder to you that interpretation is available in French and Spanish. You will find the icons on your screen. We're going to start this session, though, by hearing from the former UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Mr. Adama Dieng.
Depuis le Sénégal, je vous salue. Aujourd'hui, notre monde est dans la tourmente et je me demande parfois si nous avons retenu les leçons de l'histoire. Il y a 27 ans, 1 million de personnes ont été exterminées au Rwanda en l'espace de 100 jours parce qu'elles étaient Tutsis. Un génocide perpétré sous le regard passif de la communauté internationale. Et pourtant, tous les facteurs de risque de crimes contre l'humanité, du crime de génocide étaient réunis. Avant les machettes, le discours de haine occupait déjà l'espace médiatique. Oui, les mots tuent autant que les balles. Aujourd'hui, nous assistons à la montée alarmante des discours de haine, de stigmatisation et de discrimination. C'est pourquoi nous devrions investir davantage dans la prévention pour faciliter l'aube d'un monde sans atrocités criminelles. Nul doute que de vos analyses factuelles découleront des recommandations pratiques pour un changement de paradigme dans la façon de mener nos actions de prévention. Témoin des initiatives du groupe africain depuis Manille et Kampala, j'espère que leur détermination sera une source d'émulation pour les acteurs des autres régions. Je souhaite plein succès à GAAMAC IV.
We are hearing from Adama Dieng, the former UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, reminding us that there's much more work to be done. Apologies if you weren't able to hear him in the live stream, but there were subtitles, so I'm sure that everybody got the seriousness of his message. So with no further ado, I am now going to hand over to the moderator of our next panel, Silvia Fernandez de Gorende. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire, for giving these updates, for introducing our second panel. We had a first one, very inspiring first panel, where we understood, I think, a bit better what is hate speech and what can be done to counter hate speech, or what should be done to counter hate speech in the long term, in the short term, and of course the difficulties of doing so. And actually we also had a very interesting discussion in this panel on who should do it. States, social media companies, society as a whole, and of course, what to do when hate speech is directed to particularly vulnerable groups. Now, in this panel, we will continue this discussion, and we will discuss hate speech as a risk indicator and triggering factor of mass atrocities. This, I hope, will provide an in-depth analysis on cases of hate speech as a precursor to genocide and other mass atrocity crimes. So let me first start by a warm welcoming to our distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them. We are here honored to have among us Ms. Alice Nderitu, United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, whose support and contribution to the works of GAAMAC steering group are extremely important and invaluable to us. Then we have Mr. Wichert, advisor of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, which is the oldest of GAAMAC's informal alliances. And then there is Lieutenant General Roméo Dallaire, Honorary Chair of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, MIGS, And I am pleased to know that MIGS is also a GAAMAC long-time partner. And last but not least, we have Ms. Susan Benesch, founder of the Dangerous Speech Project. So let's start with you, Alice, if I may. Alice, on June 18, 2019, the United Nations Secretary General launched the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech and provided a guidance note on addressing and countering COVID-19 related hate speech on 11 May 2020. Can you provide us with an update on its implementation at the UN level and more particularly at the national level? And of course, I would also ask you if you can also tell us how can GAAMAC's community contribute to the implementation efforts so national mechanisms are reinforced towards addressing and tackling hate speech, particularly during COVID-19. Alice, you are all ears. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Judge, as always. And from the outset, I would like to express my gratitude for organizing this.
Excuse me, Alice, but there is some problems with the sound. So you need to put up your sound. Can you put up your sound on your end? They are telling me that it is on your end that you should be putting up.
It's at 100%.
Oh my God, you are 100%.
Yes.
Maybe you can get closer to the microphone then. Yeah, I think you are getting better there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better, much better. Thank you very much, Alice, for this. Let's start again.
I'm right next to my computer. I'm talking right into it.
Yes, I can see. Thank you.
All right, then. So I was saying thank you very much, expressing gratitude to GAAMAC and to yourself, Judge, for organizing this fourth plenary meeting of the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes, and inviting me to this very good panel. And in other spaces. And you talked about the plan of action that was launched by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and on 18th June 2019. And since then, what has happened? What has happened is that the Secretary General launched the plan of action on his speech, with my office as a focal point to implement the strategy in this plan of action. And we do this mainly by providing support to UN field entities to develop context-specific plans of action on hate speech. I have a team that just came from Bosnia and Herzegovina. They've gone there to help the UN team there to develop a specific strategy.
I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but we do have some problems. I think, well, the other panelists are muted, so I don't know where this is coming from, but we have a lot of background noise. Oh, I'm sorry, but it seems that not only you need to be close to your computer, but you cannot move anything. I'm sorry for this, Alice. I'm very sorry.
Sorry?
Yeah, you need to be careful with not touching the microphone or moving too much, because then there is a lot of background from your end.
Okay.
But you were telling us about the plan of action of Secretary General Guterres.
Okay, yes, I was saying that we have a plan of action that you mentioned, and I mentioned too. That was launched in 18th June 2019, and we office is the focal point for its implementation. And in regard to its implementation, that we work with UN field entities to make sure to develop context-specific plans of action on hate speech. And we know that right now there's a lot of consciousness around the world in terms of hateful narratives, how much that they are informing violence, but this has been the state of the world for quite a bit of time. And So what we are doing now is that we received several requests from UN country teams around the world. And I was talking about two members of my team who've just come back from Bosnia and Herzegovina, where they've helped the team there to develop a plan of action, a context-specific plan of action. And before that, they were in Kenya. And there have been quite a number of countries that now have context-specific plans of action for UN country teams. They include Cote d'Ivoire, they include Sri Lanka, they include Ethiopia, they include Ukraine, Costa Rica, quite a number of countries. So in this regard, we also have, right now, we have supported drafting of mandates, and now we have some peacekeeping and special political missions that are specifically mandated to monitor, analyze, and report on hate speech trends because of the growing rise of this phenomenon, and really, and the impact that it's out there, partly due to the fact that social media amplifies the hate speech. So my office has taken this leading role in further developing UN policy on hate speech, and in September last year, we published a specific detailed guidance to support the implementation of the UN strategy at the national level. And this detailed guidance is especially for UN field entities, but can also be used by everyone else in society. Take action to tackle hate speech in a holistic way. We are in the process of finalizing a guidance note on gender-based hate speech that was developed with the support of the Working Group on Hate Speech. And I believe that this will be especially helpful, not just to UN entities, but to everyone out there to address hate speech based on misogyny and discrimination along gender lines. In October, just a few weeks ago, on October 26th, we held in partnership with UNESCO a Global Education Ministers Conference on the role of education in addressing and resilience against hate speech. This conference was attended by ministers of education from the whole world, and we convened by the Secretary General. And so the conference has resulted in an outcome document, which we are now implementing. It has very specific recommendations for countries, ministries of education in particular, on addressing hate speech through education. And of course, my office continues to work closely with UNESCO and on all this. Then my office also facilitated the development of the plan of action for religious leaders and actors to prevent incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. It's also called the FAIR's Plan of Action. So this plan of action provides recommendations to religious actors on how to prevent incitement to violence and become agents of atrocity prevention. And then in addition to this, we have seen that hate speech has been placed in the agenda of many different intergovernmental forums of the United Nations. We've been putting that out and supporting that. And in July this year, we were very proud. We supported the resolution under the sponsorship of the government of Morocco, the adoption of the resolution by the General Assembly that called for member states to provide support to the implementation of the UN strategy on hate speech. This resolution has also established 18th June as the International Day for Countering Hate Speech. So, and it requests the President of the General Assembly to organize a high-level meeting on hate speech to mark the commemoration of this first International Day. And I would request GAAMAC to have this day in mind, because we will be reaching out to you to see what it is that we can do together on the International Day of Hate Speech. The first one will be on the year 2022. And at the end of last month, again, October 28th, my office responded to the invitation of the Security Council to co-organize with the President then, Kenya, an area formula meeting of the Security Council on addressing and countering hate speech and preventing incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence on social media. And I briefed the Security Council, and with me, my office brought on board representatives from Facebook, Google, Twitter, TikTok, and Access Now, which is a non-governmental organization. So given that social media platforms are likely to become a key factor in promoting hate speech and facilitating incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence in situations addressed by the Security Council, this meeting was essential to begin a dialogue between Council members, the UN, and social media companies on the role of social media in conflict and post-conflict situations, and on their contribution to international peace and security. It is my intention to brief the Security Council as many times as possible on different aspects of hate speech. And right now, I've put out a request to the current president to provide another brief on hate speech from the perspective of the funding of hate speech, who funds hate speech. So I would say that history has taught us that hate speech can be a precursor to and a trigger of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And I was recently in Rwanda and Bosnia-Herzegovina, two countries that played a key role in the formation of this office, because my office was created as a result of the failure of the international community and of the UN to stop the genocides in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Rwanda. So I would say that in regards to hate speech, for both countries, I was responding to growing concerns of online and offline hate speech, as well as to persistent patterns of denial of the crime of genocide and glorification of war criminals, which is often closely connected to the use of hate speech. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, especially, I was appalled by the extent of existing hate speech along identity lines, visible in newspapers, visible in so many spaces. And it's all related to the denial of the Srebrenica genocide and the glorification of convicted war criminals. And so in the last few months, the country has been paralyzed by a serious political crisis, which is marked by constant hate speech, divisive rhetoric, perpetuated online, and exacerbating divisions and endangering peace and security. It is a country that I speak often about. The situation there is a situation that I speak often about. And I would say that last month, I also attended the Eradicate Hate Global Summit to commemorate the October 27th, 2018 shooting of 11 people, which was really the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States. So I went to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and we have to remember that the gunman had earlier posted anti-Semitic and anti-refugee hate messages online. So these tactics that are common to Holocaust and genocide deniers and are often propagated online through hate speech, they include disputing the number and identity of the Holocaust and genocide victims. So moving on in terms of what we can do together, I would say that there are quite a number of examples of where hate speech has been mobilized online. What has happened to the Rohingya, so much of it was mobilized online, and the evidence has been given to those who are looking into these issues. But in Myanmar, we saw the buildup of years of hatred and exclusionary rhetoric against the Rohingya, both online and offline. And the fact-finding mission set up by the Human Rights Council has documented some of these instances. In Ethiopia, I've issued quite a number of statements and raised alarm, especially in regard to hate speech. I have pointed out inflammatory statements that have been used by leadership in Ethiopia, top political leaders and associated armed groups that have used dehumanizing language, like referring to other people as cancer, devil, weed, roots that need to be uprooted, weeds that need to be uprooted, birds, hyenas that need their tongues to be cut off. And they've been widely propagated online. And I think we must remember that before the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, that they were dehumanized by being called cockroaches. So we also saw the similar dehumanization of the Jews before the Holocaust. They were called cancers. So I would just like to ask all of us in GAAMAC to keep a lookout for this kind of language, bring it to our attention, so that then we put together ways, because we are working very closely with social media, tech and social media companies, we would be able to get into a position. We can do something about it in terms of getting the content offline, but also holding people accountable. So in Iraq and Syria, ISIL also use social media platforms to spread their exclusionary ideology and hate speech. And we know that social media contributes to fan the flames of violence, but at the same time, it brings people together, important venue to connect people, and we can continue to work with this. So I would like to say that I encourage all of you here, what we can do together as partners of GAAMAC, that I encourage all of you here to look at the UN strategy and plan of action for hate speech and consider how it can be implemented through the work you're already doing on prevention. It's a very useful tool. It was drafted with the consultation with so many of you. I also encourage the GAAMAC community to strengthen ongoing efforts to fight online hate speech, even while we respect freedom of opinion and expression. And much needs to be done, especially in respect to content moderation. We know the algorithms that are used by tech and social media companies are not enough. Because there are billions of messages posted daily in thousands of different languages and dialects. And I know that I also believe that solutions that will help us in solving problems need to be innovative. And GAAMAC has this big tent approach, which offers a critical space to explore all these innovative ways to prevent and respond to the risk of atrocity crimes effectively. I know you probably may have heard from your first panel that there doesn't exist a universal definition of what hate speech is. And I'm glad to say that the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech gives a definition, defines hate speech as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or group on the basis of who they are, in other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. And because there is always this very thin line between freedom of expression and hate speech, we again would encourage, in partnership with GAAMAC, leadership, including leaders of countries, of member states of the UN, to provide local ownership, national level ownership to tackle hate speech, because we don't have an international legal definition of hate speech, and we rely quite a bit on member states to provide the ways and means in which to ensure that hate speech is hate speech, especially people are brought to account for the things that they do on hate speech. So I would say the earlier the preventive action, the broader the range of options, and because hate speech is a risk factor for violence that must be addressed early as windows of opportunity close when crises emerge. And addressing and countering hate speech requires the full commitment of all actors in society, locally, regionally, and internationally. And I am aware that GAAMAC can see developments from a perspective that we who now work in the United Nations may miss. And so therefore, I look forward to your views. I look forward to the views of this panel on how to better utilize existing tools, but also how to create new tools, and also how to maximize the convening power of this office for the cause of prevention of genocide in instances when hate speech constitutes a threat to peace and security. So as the UN focal point on hate speech, as special advisor on the prevention of genocide, I do truly hope that we can advance the implementation of the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech together in much the same way as we consulted when drafting it. And I do hope so to keep learning from your rich experience and knowledge. And I can say that you can please count on my support and that of my office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alice, for this very important presentation. You have told us a lot of the good things that are happening in order to promote more international cooperation and also more action at the national level. But you have also reminded us of how hate speech can be a trigger of violence, can be a threat to security. You have given us examples from the past, but also from the present. And you have said something that leads us immediately to our second panelist, because you have talked about some common denominators on the denial of facts, and you have brought us back to the Holocaust. And here we have Wichert and Have, Special Advisor of IHRA. And IHRA, as you may know, the Alliance or the Holocaust, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, they adopted on 10 October 2013, they adopted a working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion. Since then, IHRA has developed and refined existing resources to allow for the identification of all the forms of denial and distortion of the Holocaust. They have very recently issued recommendations to identify the distortion and counter the distortion of Holocaust. So, Wichert, can you provide us with a reflection on this denial and distortion of Holocaust and its connection to hate speech as a trigger of atrocity prevention?
Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. Thank you, Sylvia, for your words and for your questions. It's always good to be at GAAMAC with their important work. Where do revisionism, hate speech, and distortion meet? when an individual person's responsibility for mass murder is changed into a heroic role for the nation, this is hate speech for the victims. When a nation's complicity in mass murder is revised as a heroic battle for independence, this is revisionism. It is a distortion of the truth. For this reason, countering distortion is a challenge for all of us because it incites radicalism and radicalization, and that can lead to violence. And so is Holocaust distortion. Holocaust distortion does not deny, but mitigates and mischaracterizes the Holocaust, the persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews in the Second World War by the German Nazis and their allies. And it mitigates the genocides of the Roma. Holocaust distortion erodes our understanding of this history and nourishes conspiracy theories and dangerous forms of nationalism. It misuses the word Holocaust for other issues. It promotes instrumentalization by the state or individuals. Distortion is when the Holocaust is equated with other issues which are introduced as competing stories. The real history, depth and range of mass murder in the Holocaust is falsified this way. Distortion is not always easy to identify. Unlike denial, it uses partly real knowledge and then mitigates and mischaracterizes it. We have to look where the Holocaust is linked to other issues, to look where the truth of history is put in doubt, and to be aware of new forms of nationalism and of those who despise this diversity in society. The special phenomenon in this time is the growing of nationalism and the actions for the rehabilitation of perpetrators in the Holocaust. These rehabilitations often hide the perpetratorship under a veil of patriotism. IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, as has been said, has been an active player in the field of countering anti-Semitism and distortion. And indeed, already in 2013, a working definition was formulated and adopted. Last year, a global task force against Holocaust distortion was installed with help of the then German chair. In this year, 2021, several brochures and a film are published and made available online, some in cooperation with UNESCO and others. Titles are Understanding Holocaust Distortion and Recognizing and Countering Holocaust Distortion. This brochure contains recommendations for policy and decision makers and elaborates on, among others, identifying and monitoring Holocaust distortion, training to tackle distortion, strengthening institutions that address the safeguarding of the historical record, and recognizing and responding online. The toolkit for countering distortion will be ready for use in January next year. All these texts and tools are available on the website of the IHRA, holocaustremembrance.com, Holocaust Remembrance in one word. In the endeavor to counter Holocaust distortion, policymakers and government officials are essential partners. And as we heard, the UN is already a very important one. There is also a pressing need for media, social media, civil society partners, as well as law enforcement to increase their awareness and strengthen their responses to this growing problem. It is a problem that reaches from Holocaust distortion to the undermining of democracy and to triggering mass atrocities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wichert, for telling us all the concrete things that are being done by IRA to counter the distortion, and you have referred to very concrete initiatives to also to educate and to help to identify, as you said, distortion is not the same as denial. Sometimes it may be not very easy to identify. You need tools for that. So thank you for this. And before moving to the next speakers, I would like to remind participants to send their questions via the chat function to because this is an interactive exercise, so your questions are welcome to the participants. So I would go to Lieutenant General Roméo Dallaire. Roméo, if I may, you yourself have witnessed, while in your post in Rwanda, you have witnessed genocide and other mass atrocity crimes that and you have realized that these do not happen overnight. We have all learned that genocide is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but you do have early signs. And how can, in your view, how can the international community support and strengthen atrocity early warning mechanisms? And also, if I may, a second question, and can you provide current initiatives, good practices that have supported national efforts towards fighting hate speech and discrimination? You, as part of MIGS, maybe you can tell us more about this. Can you build that from these recommendations from last year's Decoding Hate Speech series that were convened by GAAMAC and MIGS? So we are all ears, Lieutenant General.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm most appreciative of being able to communicate with you. I'm sitting in a hotel here in Switzerland, and I hope the communications are functioning. Thank you to the GAAMAC team for inviting me to this, and thank you through me inviting MIGS, the Montreal Institute of Genocide and Human Rights Studies, as an innovative institution that is working with hate speech in a way of neutralizing it in one fashion or another. And I'll attempt to answer your questions in the short time left for me. I wanted to say particularly thank you to seeing Madame Alice there, who has worked with us in different endeavors in the past, and we are very proud of her and of the office that has been created, and her being now holding that office and doing it with such dynamics. I wish, however, to just mention one thing, is that when in your speech, Madame, you mentioned how the UN failed in the genocide to pick it up. I would say that I made terrible mistakes, I'm sure, on the ground during the genocide. I think the Secretariat also made mistakes in trying to come to grips with it, let alone stop it, because we certainly didn't prevent it, that's for sure. But I truly believe that the essence of why the failure happened was in the hands of every sovereign state of the world that had any capability of being able to intervene, whether politically, whether economically, whether by resources, military, or whatever. They refused to assist us. And I think that blood on the hands of the world cannot be minimized and should not be minimized. And I think fighting hate speech might help slightly erase some of the blood of those who are suffering from mass atrocities today. We all are guilty, and so do not underestimate, in my opinion, the impact that it has had on states, but in particular, how states should be using that as a catalyst for being far more progressive in reinforcing the UN's effort, and through the UN, building a capacity. So with that said, we've seen how hate speech has, in fact, in recent times, hit countries like Myanmar and Sri Lanka and Ethiopia. And it is not unusual that I'm seeing still revisionism and even hate speech surrounding the Rwandan genocide of Tutsis, and how distortion of information can, particularly through the written media, have brought, in fact, a very negative perspective to the ultimate resolution of reconciliation and lasting peace. So it's there and it's alive. Now, my experience of the Rwandan genocide was watching and listening to a very crude method of expanding the hate of one ethnic group against another, and inciting young people. And there's the key: inciting the young people, the people 18 and under, the people who are used as the child soldiers, who are used as the perpetrators, inciting them to ultimately conduct mass atrocities and genocide. And so Radio Milkalin, a very, very basic radio capability, which ultimately was held accountable for, as the genocide radio, held accountable for sustaining the genocide, not only inciting the genocide, but sustaining it through its rather sophisticated ways of inciting young people into hatred that ultimately led them into an indoctrination to kill, an indoctrination to despise, to ultimately want to eliminate, as Madame Alice said, the cockroaches that are in their country. And so it is that tool to be able to ingrain in the minds of the youth, and by that doing so, launch an extraordinarily horrible power base to take action, because so many of the demographics of the countries of the world today have sometimes up to 50% of their population, 15 and under, who listen and are now becoming more engaged. Why is that? They're becoming more engaged because they are starting to master the social communications revolution that's going on. And because they can do that, that means you can incite in real time and sustain it worldwide, globally, without borders, hate. And that tool is the force multiplier of hate into the world, as much as it could be such an extraordinary instrument as it is at times, to in fact bring humanity together and launch us in a synergy together to move humanity to the next level of human rights and of respect for each other. It is and has been turned in its immaturity, sophisticated system, but immature, how that system in the hands of youth have in fact been a horrific incitement capability of creating not only hate, but ultimately leading people to move from hate to action and ultimately mass atrocities and genocide. And so I am very much involved with my colleagues at MIGS, at the Montreal Institute, which is a close friend of GAAMAC, and we intend to remain close to you and hope to be a progressive instrument of GAAMAC, and at the same time get closer to you also, Madame Alice. You have been with us in order to be, and I'm going to be a soldier here, be a weapon of positive peace, positive serenity, and of ultimately being able to neutralize hate speech. And so we created the Digital Mass Atrocity Prevention Lab, and it's sort of like a hub that's working against hate speech, to combat genocidal ideologies, and to work as a counterforce against extremism and their ideas. This lab is a action-oriented progressive tool that is working within the digital world, because that's where the force multiplying capability exists. Now, it's interesting that Marshall McLuhan and Canadians are not usually out there bragging about their people, but he was a very famous Canadian philosopher on communications theory. And he once remarked, all wars have been fought by the latest technology available in any culture. It should come, however, then, as no surprise that the social media platforms have become the weapons of war of the 21st century. They are the instruments that can destroy, not just influence, destroy. And that's the theme, that's the strength, that's the depth that we must be bringing to this debate, is that these are action verbs because those words are action verbs. And so, although this military terminology may offend some, I fear that unless you move it to a plateau of being able to move from some of the arcane classic methods of meeting a brand new weapon system that's been deployed out there and moving away in order to prove, in fact, that we can attack and we can neutralize, we can subside the impact of the digital world, the digital communications revolutions, by, in fact, looking at a more progressive instrument of engagement of the youth in this realm. They are not always going to be youth. There will always be youth, but they are not themselves going to remain youth. They will move into adulthood. What they're picking up now in this revolution of communications is going to stay with them. And so I would argue that the weaponization of the social media, where revolutionary technological times, because of its impact, and in the hands of populations that has no limits and has no optic of its full potential, can in bad faith use this as a significant influence in real time to affect people to consolidate, to coalesce, and to build momentum into action. And so, just as I worked as the patron of the Pugwash movement to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons and to create arms control, and we still exist. And we did, get a Nobel Peace Prize, and it's pan-global, but there are still tens of thousands of nuclear weapons there, and there's still the foolishness of states that think that this horrific arcane weapon system is actually going to stabilize the world and give us peace. They are the most useless instrument, and in fact, I consider them an insult and a threat to my human right to security. Well, as we work at building that movement and continue to work at countries to reduce that weapon system, I believe we've got to focus on the youth now with their new system, their global system of the digitization of communications, and with that new generation, which I call the generation without borders, the under 25s, let's say. They work globally already. They should be the front lines of changing the attitudes in regards to the use of that system. And in fact, they themselves participate in reducing the capability of hate speech on, in fact, the social medias that are out there. I'm not saying let's create a digital Peace Corps or something like that, however, or even digital peacekeepers, but I am saying that we do need a movement of youth committed and dedicated to reinforcing the strength of the digital communication revolution among youth, to then take on hate speech, them to demonstrate how they consider it to be so offensive as to be inappropriate to even make its way onto the international sphere. And so I think that, I'm absolutely for, as I conclude, the governments to play a role in streamlining policies and engaging experts with knowledge in social media and atrocity prevention. Of course, I mean, that's their job. and they better be doing it. And in fact, be involved in it, but in a far more aggressive way than I've seen so far. Second, I think, yeah, innovative civil society organizations to deal with this issue, of course. And I think that they can, both government but private sector, get online and engage and support online innovators in order to attenuate the impact of hate speech. I think the prevention methods of sort of the extremist cheerleaders and their supporters can be tracked and can be cracked. We can break that code. I am convinced we can, but not maybe with people of my age, but I think by the youth who will ultimately suffer, because we're going to enter into an era of generational wars, generational conflicts, and the sustainment of hate. How can, deployed ultimately to establish a humanitarian protection zone in the southwest of Rwanda, how could legionnaires coming from a Franco country, 18 years old, tell me to my face that he hated Tutsis? Where did that come from? And how could it in fact still be part of a philosophy or thinking of a force that has an ethos, that has the discipline, that is supposed to have the neutrality of meeting its nation's needs, and particularly in a humanitarian role? And so, yeah, the platforms are out there, and they're going to continue to be sophisticated. And Google's going to be out there, and Google, hey, who says that Google's replacement could not go rogue? Who's putting the control on it? What is the instrument that's going to make sure that they don't digitize things that are not complete, but in fact, that are skewed? How can we prevent them from going rogue? And so ultimately, the big users, the ones who are in the forefront of this era of revolution of communications, the ones who are already global, and the ones who have got the most to lose into the future because it's their future, they're the ones who are going to face this, and they're the ones often who are called to try to stop it. The youth of the world, that generational borders, they have to be engaged in an attrition battle to fight this horrific instrument being through this horrific instrument called hate speech, to be in fact neutralized on the waves and ultimately turn the social media into the most progressive piece of humanity and peace that we've ever seen so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your remarks. And Susan, Roméo Dallaire has just told us that he is convinced, and I'm glad that he has this positive attitude that we can attack, neutralize the impact of digital technologies in the dissemination of hate speech. Now, Susan, your organization, one of the pillars of your organization is to track and study dangerous speech. Now, can you provide us with examples of your advising services to technology companies to mitigate and respond to harmful discourse?
Yes, first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to participate. I'll have to be extremely brief as the panel has so far gone a bit longer than planned. We do a lot of work with social media companies to try to diminish either what we call dangerous speech, which is any form of communication that can inspire people to condone or commit violence against another group of people. We try to help them to diminish either that speech or its effects, and it's very crucial, of course, to keep in mind the importance of both. Simply attempting to delete all of the inflammatory hate speech or dangerous speech will never work. It's what some people have called a game of whack-a-mole. It will keep on reappearing faster than it can be deleted. As Lieutenant General Dallaire has pointed out, the real solution is to educate people to understand this kind of communication, to see it as the political tool that it is, as the tool of manipulation and war that it is, and to be able to resist it. My organization, which is a research team, also works to try to conduct research and experiments to better understand how we can in fact diminish the impact of such speech, of such communication. It isn't, after all, effective if you're trying to conquer any major human problem, whether it's the widespread prevalence of smoking or a disease, particularly if you're speaking about one related to human behavior. It isn't effective simply to attempt solutions randomly, as some people have called it, to throw spaghetti at the wall. It's much more effective to try interventions and then to rigorously measure their impact, to find out what is in fact most effective. Just to give you an example, there are some horrifying warnings on cigarette packages in some countries, but research has, showing the terrible effects of smoking and trying to remind smokers that they can literally be killed by smoking. However, research indicates that those warnings don't, in fact, diminish smoking. So they look convincing perhaps to non-smokers, but they aren't actually very effective. So I just want to remind this distinguished panel and our audience of the enormous importance of rigorously studying interventions and their effects. Then I want to make just a few quick points. One is that, as Alice Nderitu has pointed out, the UN has proposed a definition of hate speech. It isn't the same thing as language or other forms of communication that can inspire atrocities. It's important to remember that in that definition refers to communication that refers in some pejorative manner to another identity group. Pejorative sets an extremely low bar. You can say any number of things about another group of people that could be understood as pejorative, but that do not at all increase the risk of atrocities. So I would remind GAAMAC of the great importance of focusing on the forms of speech that do seem likely to increase the risk of atrocities. This is also enormously important for protecting freedom of expression. Then I want to make a second point, which is that as Lieutenant General Dallaire has pointed out critically, states often fail to prevent, to react, to prevent and stop mass atrocities. There's another very important point to be made regarding states, however, and it's often missed at gatherings like this and discussions like this. That is that inflammatory hate speech, or what I call dangerous speech, the kind that inspires the youth, young people, to commit mass atrocities, most of that comes from states. States produce it. Ethiopia is a horrifying and striking example at the moment of dangerously inflammatory speech coming directly from states, from state officials, and also from many people whom the state is condoning, the state is encouraging to repeat such communication. We also have many other cases in which major political leaders or heads of state do not themselves produce or circulate such speech. However, states often endorse it or even covertly finance it. There are many examples of state-sponsored troll armies operating online to tremendous effect. This is a widespread sub-phenomenon and a tremendously important consequence of social media that again, Lieutenant General Dallaire has reminded us of the great importance of, and Alice as well, of the enormous importance of social media. It's worth noticing exactly which are the phenomena that social media engenders, since after all, social media is a mechanism, is a means for humans to spread all kinds of content, good and bad. The government use of social media to spread content that inspires violence is unfortunately very widespread. And it would be a mistake not to try to do something about that if we are serious about diminishing the terrible impact of human communication that inspires atrocities. We can't really speak about the responsibility to protect without speaking about the responsibility not to touch off or inspire or direct violence in the first place. And when I say violence, of course, I'm referring now to mass atrocities. I have two more quick points to make. One is that, of course, most dangerous speech, as I call it, is also false. So there is an enormous overlap between dangerous speech or inflammatory hate speech, I'm using those terms interchangeably, and disinformation, which is, of course, a topic of great concern at the moment. The social media platforms have become quite interested, especially in the context of COVID-19, in what they might do to remove and or to counteract disinformation. They also have paid some attention to hate speech. It's very important also to get them and to get ourselves to focus on the overlap between these two categories. Inflammatory speech, which is also false, and to ask to rigorously investigate which are the ways of most effectively proceeding against that. There's quite a substantial body of research, for example, on how to convince people that a particular assertion is false. Unfortunately, simply telling them and even presenting evidence is often ineffective and sometimes even reinforces their belief in the falsehood. However, of course, I don't have time to summarize research, but research and evidence are, again, enormously useful for efforts to counter dangerous speech and disinformation, and particularly to work on the overlap, which I, again, suggest is vital. And then one final remark about how dangerous disinformation, how dangerous speech really circulates online. It is generally produced by people who are unfortunately devoted to doing that, who think it's very important and want to do it and are unlikely to be convinced to stop. However, it circulates very widely. Why? Because huge numbers of people forward and share and recirculate dangerous content. And here's the point that I want to make. It's about intent. Most of those people who share and forward and proliferate dangerous content don't think they're doing something harmful, don't recognize that content as dangerous, and usually also don't recognize it as false. They often think that they are doing something to protect their friends and family. This was the case in Rwanda. This is the case regarding COVID-19. So it's important when we think about effective interventions to distinguish between the people who are doing this with malicious intent and the people who spread such content, on the contrary, thinking that they are doing something helpful. For lack of time, I'll stop there. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute. I hope it has been useful, and I'm also very grateful for all the remarks of the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Susan. And you bring us back with some of the things, very important things that you have said. You bring us back to something that it is key, which is one is the need to strike a right balance between hate speech and freedom of expression. And then you said, well, you need, as GAAMAC and in the international community in general, you need to really focus on the type of hate speech that can indeed trigger violence and not to establish a very low bar. And also you just mentioned something about intent, that some of the people disseminating what could be considered hate speech do not necessarily do with a malicious intent. And that brings us to some of the questions we have been receiving from the audience. And I have one, maybe Susan, you want to say something? Because we also have related
yes, I'd just like to clarify, perhaps I didn't speak clearly enough.
Yeah.
I do think it's enormously important to protect freedom of expression. And I do think, as I said, that the UN definition sets a very low bar for the definition of hate speech. It defines it extremely broadly. But I was trying to make two different points. One is that if your purpose is to prevent mass atrocities, which I understand GAAMACs to be, then you should focus not on all hate speech as very broadly defined by the UN definition, but on the subset of hate speech that is related to mass atrocities. It may be that someone else wants to proceed against hate speech that doesn't have anything to do with mass atrocities and isn't likely to inspire them. But then that's a different enterprise. Does that make sense?
Very much sense, and it's exactly what I understood you had said. So thank you, don't worry.
Wonderful.
Of course, the question is always, when is exactly the point when something can trigger violence, and when do you need to start by worrying? But that is another question, and it's not an easy one. But this indeed relates us to when is there a danger? And that, if I may, brings us maybe one of questions, additional question to Wichert. Because one of the questions that we have been receiving from the audience to you in particular, Wichert, is if you can elaborate more on the danger of distortion. And actually, I would also say, is distortion of Holocaust always also done with a malicious intent? Also, are we seeing examples of distortion that maybe even done because of ignorance? But one of the questions is indeed to elaborate more on the dangers of distortion. Wichert, you are muted, please. If you can unmute.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes.
The danger of distortion, as I try to illuminate, is the fact that it's, in a sense, I try to be very concise and short. In a sense, it tries to incite to radicalism, and that is what I will try to convince Susan of, that this general radicalization leads often to more radical utterances and at the end to incitement. And that is clearly what we have seen in the prehistory of the Holocaust, that simple ideological impregnation of certain ideas can, in the long run, make people to do things they never dreamt of before. And that is, in the end, the danger of distortion. And then the second question was, of course, there are different opinions about a lot of things in international politics and in politics at home. And of course, people can reproach themselves that they are distorting reality. This is, of course, not what I meant. It is a real contradiction of what has been common knowledge about, and in this case, the Holocaust, but it could be in many other cases, as where General Dallaire spoke about the distortion of what is accepted as the reality that is has been argumentated by research and evidence. There is a difference, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and this indeed brings us also to what was been said by Roméo Dallaire, because you mentioned, Roméo, you mentioned in particular the dangers of inciting the young people to conduct mass atrocities, and maybe in this, we're talking here about hate speech that is really targeted at inciting. But can you tell us more about your foundation's activities that are targeted to educating young people to be more tolerant and resilient? Can you give us a little bit more examples on this type of activities?
That is, in fact, the object of the work that we're trying to achieve right now with some of the interesting world of artificial intelligence and trying to see how we can get into what we call a do loop, or the decision loop that youth take when they are actually on the system seeking information, looking for information and finding stuff, sometimes unexpectedly, other times deliberately. How do we get into the loop of their decision making? And some of the work that we're doing through some of the artificial intelligence organizations that are working here, particularly in the Montreal area, are looking at specifically that. Are there instruments that can be brought to the attention of the youth that will, in fact, be triggered by the creation of hate speech or terminologies or in fact sites that will do that? So I would love to be able to provide the information that we have to, in fact, GAAMAC, as we've done before because we've worked together already, but like to spread it to the community that is participating today. But there is no way that our current tools are actually able to be proactive unless we use some, in fact, counter new technology. And that's what I think that we're going to be looking at. And if that can work, that will be, and that sometimes may surprise us, that will be something that they will grasp on faster than our classic methodologies of education and information and so on from elders. It is far more peer structured. And that's, I believe, the answer for the future. And I'm hopefully not too evasive. However, we are keen to spread the information that we have, and we'll love to use the platform to do that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for these final words. We are running a bit late now, so I will need to immediately turn to Claire. Unless you want to add, you have 1 second to add something that if you if you wish so. If not, I will continue with Claire. Claire, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, the speakers and the audience, for joining us on this first day of GAAMAC IV, for your insightful comments and questions. Do check out the Innovation Square. You'll find the menu underneath the workshops menu on your screen. The Innovation Square is a virtual exhibition of organizations showcasing their innovative approaches and projects. You can discover and explore the exhibition at your own pace and time, and connect and engage the organizations and other conference participants. Tomorrow, we'll start at 6 a.m. in the Americas, midday in Europe and Africa, and at 1900 in Asia Pacific. We'll start off with 2 workshops. The first is organized by Parliamentarians for Global Action and looks at women legislators against racism, hate speech, and discrimination. It's followed at 1 o'clock European time with a workshop on masculinities and atrocity crimes, and that's organised by the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If you've not registered yet for a workshop, we encourage you to do so as the places are limited. It's a very unique opportunity for you to hear directly from experts and practitioners and to participate in these important interactive conversations. After that, Sylvia will be moderating 2 discussions on addressing hate speech and preventing discrimination, firstly in the European context and then in the global context. So that's all from me and Sylvia. We look forward to seeing you then.